Hello, and welcome to this next episode in the Natural History Project. My name is Jason Brogdon. I'm Dean of Science Instruction for Founders Classical Academies. And today, I would like to talk about evolution's landscape. In discussions of the nature of life, the terms complexity, organism, and information content are sometimes used in ways remarkably analogous to the approach of algorithmic information theory, a mathematical discipline which studies the amount of information necessary for computations. We submit this is not a coincidence. Gregory Chatin. To live in a spiritually open universe is both an ancient idea and a new concept. Forgotten may be a better term. The established dichotomy today of the natural versus the supernatural is to me a victory of materialism. Mathematics, however, potentially rebukes this notion and offers a remedy that directly links abstract perception with material manifestation. Utilizing mathematics to better appreciate creation is as old as astronomy and as new as evolutionary thought. Genesis itself is certainly written in a measured and poetic manner, which only provokes a coordination between mathematics and religion. Within the life sciences, there is a historical case that has fascinated me and a type of metaphor that offers some mileage for a deeper inflection upon God's work in the creative act. E.M. East invited the architects of theoretical population genetics, like R.A. Fisher, J.B.S. Haldane, and Sewell Wright, to present their work at the 1932 Sixth International Congress of Genetics. They were to present compact and accessible forms of their seminal work, but mathematically intimidating work on evolutionary theory. Wright's principal evolutionary paper was his 1931 Evolution in Mendelian Populations. The paper Wright delivered at the Congress in 1932 was basically a distillation of his 1931 paper and was published in the proceedings as The Roles of Mutation, Inbreeding, Crossbreeding, and Selection in Evolution. The adaptive landscape, this concept of his, was first publicly presented in this 1932 paper. Because the field of possible gene combinations of a population is so vast, Wright used the two-dimensional graphical depiction of a landscape, of an adaptive landscape, in this philosophical paper entitled Adaptive Landscape, Philosophical Reflections on Heuristic Value. This was featured in an article in 2015. The heuristic concept within a landscape or terrain of life is potentially helpful for a new notion of natural theology. It can contain both a definitive creative act by God while also allowing for the freedom required for a contingent process like evolution. Such a concept could also possibly synergize both entropy and complexity in a surprising way. In other words, if God created the framework of a landscape or a terrain that has set boundaries and topography, using this analogy, thereby being a manifestation of his providence, but allows life like water to move through the terrain, is fascinating. A pathway is set, but the unique tributaries and pathways a fluid may take is not. Sometimes life is a trickle, sometimes a flood in this analogy. Rivers alter their banks, much akin to how life alters its environment. Evolutionary thinking speaks of bottlenecks, permissive ecologies, founder's effects, drifts, and flow to describe how traits and populations oscillate between environmental possibilities. Perhaps there is and always was a pathway to becoming a type of creature that can embody the image of God, and it comes with a host of needed physical traits to express it fully. Perhaps any type of creature could have scaled the pathway, and perhaps not. Some have some of the traits, but not all. Eventually, a mammal through time was able to scale the summit. And what level is God directly involved in such a process? That is a level of speculative curiosity that I am unable to sustain, but it is fun to consider. A metaphor is an accurate analogy as far as its components and relationships correspond to the object and relationships with which it is meant to be compared. A metaphor is didactically useful, however, as far as it allows us to understand those elements and relationships better by way of this analogy. This is Lewontin, 1963. The didactic function of the adaptive landscape from Sewell as a metaphor depends on our familiarity with actual hilly landscapes and their representation as topographical maps. Metaphors play a didactic and not explanatory role in scientific theorizing. And so, according to Fisher, the adaptive landscape diagram is flawed because, in fact, as the dimensionality of the field of gene combinations and the field of gene frequencies increases, the number of stable peaks on the surface of the landscape decreases. See also Fisher, 1941. Because of this idea and the criticism that followed in the decades of discussion, new concepts of mathematical terrains of existence began to take new and unique shapes. I've included this figure as a visual for this podcast. The concept clearly touches on something that makes clear some sort of dynamical exchange in our world. This would be a type of natural theology at a very deep, integrated, and mathematical level. And so, is this the fabric of the universe? Is this the framework of life? Mathematics remains an increasingly effective language to understand and appreciate interactions within the natural world at a fundamental level. It is more than an abstraction and easily seen as a groundwork to an unseen order at every level. And so we are approaching perhaps the very bottom. How can it be that mathematics, a product of human thought independent of experience, is so admirably adapted to the objects of reality? Hundreds of years ago, Galileo Galilei stated that the universe cannot be read until we have learnt the language and become familiar with the characters in which it is written. It is written in mathematical language. Mathematics is certainly the language of science, but it is far, far more than a mere tool, however valuable, for it is, of course, both a subject and a language in its own right. John Adam, Mathematics and Nature, 2003. In the realm of biology, the discoverer of nucleic acids, Friedrich Miescher, a stereochemist, noted that grammar-like construction of genetic material. He wrote, "The many asymmetric carbon atoms offer such a colossal number of possible stereoisomers that all the richness and all the variety of heredity could just as well find its expression in them as do the words and concepts of all languages in the 24 to 30 letters of the alphabet." John Lennox, Cosmic Chemistry. A philosopher, Hans Blumenberg, then commented on this, exclaiming that organisms behave less like a clockwork and more like a speechwork. I can only conclude by repeating the engraving over the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge. In Latin, Magna Opera Domini, exquisite in omnis voluntates ejus, or the works of the Lord are great. Sought out all of them that have pleasure therein. From Psalm 111, verse 2. In the next section, I will discuss why a change in DNA that is favorable must be an act of intentional tinkering by the cell, as juxtaposed to the current mantra of fortunate, accumulated, random copying errors. However, the core of the objection has to do with a mathematical concern. Darwinian miracles should be ruled out by a Darwinian perspective in view of their biological and statistical improbability. These macro mutations must be coordinated by a system of genes and embryogenesis. If one considers the history of evolution, we must postulate thousands of miracles, in fact, without end. That is French mathematician Marcel Paul Schutzenberger in Cosmic Chemistry. My name is Jason Brogdon, recording in Lakeway Studios on October 9th, 2025. Thanks for listening.